For more on this tragic story and what it means for journalists around the world, I'm joined by Courtney Radsch. She's the Advocacy Director for the Committee to Protect Journalists. Courtney, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you.
Journalists who go into war zones know that there's inherent danger, and yet this is so brutal, so visceral. Talk to me about the impact that this has on journalists and the profession itself.
Well, seeing a video like that, seeing what happened to James Foley is incredibly intimidating to journalists around the world, to journalists trying to cover the conflict in Syria. And of course, it underscores the fact that Syria is one of the dangerous places to be a journalist. In fact, it's the most deadly country for journalists in the world. James Foley is the 70th journalist that has been killed in Syria since the conflict started.
And Iraq, it's also right up there too, isn't it?
It sure is. Iraq and Syria are both the deadliest countries on record since we started keeping statistics in 1992.
Of course, this horrific event brings back memories of 2002, which we all remember so well when Daniel Pearl was killed. And I'm going to throw up this graphic because this was written by a war correspondent, Scott Anderson. He said, what it demonstrates is that the business of reporting on war has changed fundamentally. The powers that be in a conflict zone no longer regard the media as a neutral observer, but rather as a strategic component, something to be manipulated or co-opted or simply got rid of. Is he right on target there?
I think he's right. I think journalists, as we've seen by the statistics where journalists are increasingly getting killed and imprisoned, that journalists are in the crosshairs. They're increasingly not seen as neutral bystanders. I think also the fact that the media manipulation that's possible in the new media environment makes journalists having a different role in many of these conflicts. Also, we see a lot of freelancers in the region. We see a lot of freelancers among those who are killed. I think it's becoming increasingly dangerous to be a journalist, and that's why we have to admire those who really put their lives on the line to go and cover these incredibly important conflicts.
I remember when Daniel Pearl was killed, I was working at USA Today, and the first thing that our bosses did was dispatch us out to Woodstock, Virginia, to go to one of these hazard trainings, learn how not to be kidnapped. Spent a lot of that in the journalism profession, and it speaks to the leaders in the newsroom. They don't really know how to respond to this sort of thing, and in many cases, there's a retrenchment. They tend to pull back. The Global Post actually was designed because of that, because so many people were pulling out of the region, and now we find this young man killed, a member of the Global Post. What is the chilling effect it can have on journalism?
It's going to have a huge chilling effect, as the Daniel Pearl incident did. And we already saw that the murders of Marvin Colvin, of Anthony Shadid, and those have had a major impact. Some organizations have decided not to send reporters to Syria. And I really wonder what's going to happen in the world if we don't have reporters covering that. But I also think it's important to remember that international journalists are a relatively small percentage of those who are killed. 88% of those who have been killed in Syria are local journalists. And that's true around almost the entire world, with the exception of Afghanistan.
I've got one more quote related to Daniel Pearl, and it was written by his father. It was like on the 7th anniversary of his death. And he said, "Those who mourned for Danny in 2002 genuinely hoped that Danny's murder would be a turning point in history of man's inhumanity to man. The targeting of innocents to transmit political messages would quickly become, like slavery and human sacrifice, an embarrassing relic of a bygone era. But somehow barbarism, often cloaked in the language of resistance, has gained acceptance in many circles of our society. Civilized society, so it seems, is numbed by violence, that it has lost its gift to be disgusted by evil." Have we really lost that gift, or do you think it's just that people don't know how to respond after they see something like this?
I don't think we've lost our gift, because I think the attention paid to this horrific case is a testament to the fact that we haven't lost our compassion. But I think it's incredibly difficult these days to figure out how to respond to this situation. I think there was something positive that came out of a horrific circumstances with Danny Pearl, in that the U.S. government decided to pass a Daniel Pearl Act, which requires embassies to report on levels of press freedom and the situation of journalists in country. And so even though it's a horrifying act, it's had, at least we have some accountability that's happening there. But it's dangerous. ISIS has specifically targeted journalists for kidnapping, for assault. There have been jihadist posts that have talked about journalists being part of a target for the Mujahideen in Syria. And I think that, it's incredibly dangerous for journalists these days.
Does reporting on this fuel things for them, though? Obviously, they know they get this worldwide platform. They do something gruesome like this.
I think that's a huge challenge in being in the news profession, is how do we balance between covering what is newsworthy and avoiding becoming a platform for propaganda. And I think that we can see that reflected in the the type of coverage that you're showing. We're not giving too much coverage of the video, but you have to contextualize in some cases. And it comes down to journalistic ethics. It comes down to professional responsibility and integrity. And it's going to be a challenge to see what comes next, what comes after this. And there are still, at least according to our count, at least 20 journalists who are still missing in Syria. We've counted 80 journalists who have been abducted since the conflict started, 65 last year alone. So things are not getting better.
Courtney Radsch, I wish the situation was much different. And we do appreciate you coming in, though, and talking to us this evening.